Corso says he wasn't able to further develop the alien mind control interface. His theory was that it would only function with an alien brain. But this momentary setback, he claims, didn't forestall development of another Roswell artifact, an imprinted circuit of mysterious design.
We also had a little charred chip. Small thing, maybe 3/8 of an inch, square, two threads coming out, and a little window in the center with thin wires. These came from Roswell. We didn't know exactly the function of these integrated circuits, but we suspected that these were circuits, electrical circuits.
Corso asserts that he brings the object to Bell Labs, which had developed the transistor 14 years earlier. He says scientists there were able to analyze and later recreate the alien microchip.
What would happen if something like that were to occur? Well, what would happen is, in a very short time, the world would be transformed radically.
There's no doubt that after the development of the integrated circuit in the early 1960s, the world is transformed. Electronic devices from the cell phone to the laptop computer become reality. Corso claims the Roswell microchip was supposedly damaged from the crash, but that in his possession is another alien object, this one apparently fully functioning.
He knows from reports that when people were shining this thing around, it caused burning on the surfaces that it was aimed at.
Corso says he reads classified military reports speculating that the artifact from Roswell, apparently capable of burning holes in walls, is some kind of cutting tool, perhaps used for surgery. At Hughes Aircraft from the late 1950s into the early 1960s, researchers have been working on what would become the first laser tracking and targeting devices for military aircraft. But engineers have run into a snag in their efforts to create a practical device. That is, Corso asserts, until he shows them the alien cutting tool.
It did accelerate after 1960-61 because people figured out new ways to make lasers. And as the science advanced, the engineering advanced.
Corso's filing cabinet reportedly contains another treasure from the Roswell trove.
It was glass tubes. And they emitted different color lights. And those were sent to Bell Laboratories. From that was one of the greatest advancements I think we have today, came out in fiber optics.
Many UFO researchers theorize that the spacecraft had no wiring because it was fitted instead with fiber optic cable. Transmitting information with light happens to be an old technology. It dates back to one of the pioneers of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, who experimented with a device he called the photophone in 1880.
Most people have never heard of it, but back in his day, serious scientists thought that the photophone was a more impressive invention than the telephone. The photophone was a way that you could transmit a voice signal over a beam of light.
Corso's research tells him that data transmission via light had failed because scientists could not direct a beam of light around corners. But Corso contends that the Roswell artifacts might hold the answer.
They were looking at this glass fibers and say, wow, the light actually turns a corner. How can light go in curves? And then they concluded the reason for that was because it had a cladding wrap on it. The cladding was the key discovery you had to make in order to make fiber optics work.
Although it would not be until the 1970s that fiber optics were in general use, UFO researchers believed that the cladding wrap on the alien artifact, an outer covering on the fiber that guided the light, made it possible for earthly fiber optics to advance. Corso also says he examined some curious super strong fibers that his military reports claim come from the aliens' flight suits.
The first thing of the fabric that amazed me was a thread that I couldn't cut with a razor blade. Just a thread.
In his book, Corso offers a theory about the fibers composing the alien flight suits.
The alien bodies, probably the more vulnerable aspects, were protected from what had to be incredible energies by the super tenacity of the fabric, which somehow formed a shield. And Corso said they didn't put these on, they were woven around them. In other words, they spun them like a cocoon.
According to Corso, he wonders if these super strong fibers could be developed into super strong bulletproof shields for law enforcement and military use.
Corso said that the Army tried to bring it to the University of Colorado to try and fabricate this technology.
The mid-1960s saw great advances in super strong fabrics that used polymer technology, the type of molecules that Corso claimed were present in his alien fabric. In 1965, Kevlar was invented, a fabric that would be used in bulletproof vests. More proof, according to Corso, of the impact of alien technology. There's no denying that the period Corso works in the Pentagon coincides with a period of rapid technological growth in the United States. Corso's supporters say alien technology played a role, but others see things very differently. In his best-selling book, The Day After Roswell, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso claimed to introduce alien technology from the 1947 Roswell crash to the American military's technological agenda. But others say that the scientific leaps of the 1960s were not made by one hero, and not with the help of aliens.
It's nice to think in terms of one heroic person leading us into the new world of far-out technology learned from saucers. That sounds great. But having worked on a whole host of big research and development programs, that isn't the way it works. Look, on the aircraft nuclear propulsion program, we employed 3,500 people. 1,100 of them were engineers and scientists. We were spending $100 million a year. That's the kind of effort it takes to develop new technology. And that was in 1958 dollars at that.
Corso claims that the laser jumped from theory to practice after scientists examined the device found in the Roswell crash debris. But to science historians, that's science fiction.
The laser is a good example of an invention that doesn't really have a single eureka moment where somebody gets a brilliant inspiration and then they go down into their basement workshop and 15 minutes later they've hammered together a laser. The laser really began back in 1951 when a physicist from Columbia University was taking a walk in Washington.
That physicist was Charles Towns.
And I woke up early in the morning worrying about why hadn't we been able to get anywhere. It was before breakfast, so I went out and walked out in the park, sat down in the park. Suddenly I said, hey, wait a minute. We can get a whole collection of molecules all in excited states with excess energy. And I wrote down the numbers to see now, could I make it oscillate?
And it took him 2 years and $50,000 in government grants before he could come up with the very first barely operable microwave laser.
The first laser device used microwaves rather than light. The light-emitting version wasn't functional until 1960, 9 years after Professor Towns jotted down his notes. As for aliens jump-starting the process,
No, aliens had nothing to do with the technology of the laser, nor do I. Unfortunately, I don't think aliens have given us any new information yet.
while the laser's development was slow and steady, the integrated circuit advanced rapidly. But the greatest progress was made by scientists well after Corso retired.
The real breakthrough happened in 1971 when a guy named Ted Hoff conceived of the idea of putting an entire microprocessor on one piece of silicon, a computer on a chip.
Basically, what happens in an integrated circuit is that you are controlling the flow of electrons, or actually, in some cases, the absence of electrons.
Ted Hoff, known as the architect of the microprocessor, started working on integrated circuits in 1968. Hoff disputes Corso's claim that an alien chip captured from the Roswell crash made an earthly version conceivable.
If you have a crash scenario, there's presumably damage done, and that damage may make the device even harder to analyze. And even if you had the device, you'd really want a context. If you had seen this device in those days and had no context to put it in other words, what's it used for, you'd even have less chance of understanding it.
Hoff also says that to reverse engineer an integrated circuit, as Corso claimed happened in 1961, you would need a scanning electron microscope, which was not invented until 1966.
Even looking at devices today, the resolution of the devices are such that ordinary optical microscopes really don't reveal them. So you'd need something more sophisticated. I don't think at that time anybody would have been able to figure out what it was.
Philip Corso also claimed that his alien fiber optics cable inspired scientists. But science historians don't support his assertion because fiber optics required a convergence of technologies occurring over decades of development.
The idea really became interesting in 1965 when lasers were available and people suddenly realized there was a commercial use for fiber optics. So shortly after that, the project was tackled by a trio of inventors at Corning, and they came up with a successful fiber optic in 1970.
The highly directional light of a laser improved signal strength. The team of researchers at Corning Glass created a form of fused silica. This super pure glass material was capable of carrying 65,000 times more information than copper wire. This made fiber optics commercially practical, 10 years after Corso claimed to have accelerated the technology.
That's the real achievement that Don Keck and Peter Schultz and Bob Maurer came up with when they were at Corning. It was coming up with this completely unexpected way to make glass.
Corso also stated that he inspired a quantum leap in image enhancement technology. But science historians say the technology of turning night into day was also decades in the making.
Progress increased so incrementally. It goes all the way back to the 1940s when image-intensifying radar scopes were issued to Allied troops in the Pacific Theater.
The first night vision gear employed thermal imaging. Developed by the Germans during World War II, it brought heat energy into the visible spectrum using an infrared light and a receiver. Then, by the early 1960s, William Spicer, a Defense Department researcher, had created image intensification technology. Fort Belvoir scientists built upon his work. Image intensification requires no additional light. Functioning like a radio receiver for light waves, it amplifies existing light. Today's image intensifiers are small enough to be worn as goggles and are capable of amplifying light by a factor of 35,000. Scientists suggest that if Corso really had an alien image enhancer, showing it to researchers in the 1960s did little to advance the technology's measured progress.
The engineering that was required just progressed at a very slow rate. Making night vision work was largely the result of really brilliant engineering.
Finally, according to technology experts, Corso's super tenacity fibers came not from alien spacesuits, but from years of research by a scientist named Stephanie Kwolek, who worked at the DuPont company. She learned how to organize super strong chains of atoms in 1965, and by 1971, Kevlar was on the market.
The theory that something like Kevlar came off a flying saucer strikes me as being insulting to someone like Stephanie Kwolek, who poured enormous amounts of effort, years of her life, tremendous dedication and brain power went into cracking the secrets of nature.
Furthermore, some skeptics insist Lieutenant Colonel Corso simply didn't have the technical background to run a reverse engineering program.
I read something he'd written years ago and found that it was not high-tech. I worked for General Electric, Westinghouse, General Motors, TRW Systems, McDonnell Douglas, with lots of technical people. I'm a physicist myself. And I saw nothing in what Corso had written that gave any indication of his having the knowledge, the skills, the talent, the background to handle stuff like this and get it into industry.
Corso had an answer to this objection, claiming that his team of A-list scientists helped him interpret the Roswell cache.
I didn't have the training or the background for something. You know, they got highly technical. But fortunately, the German scientists were there. I knew von Braun, and I knew Hermann Obert. Obert was a man that said we've been helped. But we had to keep it quiet to protect our budget, protect our organization.
For doubters, there is also the issue of Corso's rank. A lieutenant colonel, some argue, wouldn't be running things as Corso claimed he was.
I think an indication of his value to the military would have been given by the fact that he was not a full colonel, despite all his years in service.
But others stand by Corso's assertions, particularly those who say they're familiar with the way the U.S. military functions.
Back in those days, you know, a lieutenant colonel had a lot more authority and position than a lieutenant colonel today has. And even today, you've got lieutenant colonels doing quite a bit of the important tactical and even strategic planning and operation.
The History Channel contacted the military contractors Corso claims to have worked with, and all say there was no alien involvement in the technologies Corso says he jump-started. No memos, directives, or paperwork of any kind exist to directly support Corso's assertions about reverse engineering alien technology. But Corso's supporters say there is no paper trail for a very good reason. Among those who believe there was an alien crash near Roswell, there is consensus on one concept. The U.S. government systematically suppressed the truth.
The government of the United States and other governments around the world have gone out of their way to keep that wrapped up inside a riddle that's smothered by an enigma.
Philip Corso says he also had to keep his reverse engineering program under wraps.
We couldn't discuss it. We made a decision. It cannot be discussed outside of us. We're doing good. We have the authority, we have the money for our R&D projects. Well, that's fine. Let's keep it that way. Let's not get mixed up in the murky area of whether they exist or not.
As for Corso's contributions to the advancement of science, skeptics say that the technology he claimed to have pushed forward was ready to emerge anyway. As proof, they offer up the mind control headband, one alien technology that Corso did not claim to develop. Today, it's well on its way to becoming a reality without his help. Since the 1970s, scientists have been experimenting with using EEG readouts of brain waves to provide feedback and change behavior. It's now possible to use EEG feedback games like this one to learn how to manage brain states. But mind control technology has advanced even further than that.
Going to open the first email, which says congrats. It says you...
In 2004, researchers received FDA approval to test tiny brain implants designed to allow disabled people to control computers using their thoughts.
Next, I'm going to paint a circle.
UFO researchers say the government's supposed cover-up may forever obscure the facts of Roswell, and therefore also obscure the truth about whether alien technology played a supporting role in the development of fiber optics, super-strong fabrics, lasers, integrated circuits, or battle-ready image enhancement.
Some people think that, for example, aliens intervened in 3500 BC in Egypt to help the Egyptians build pyramids. You know, well, doggone it, the Egyptians of 3500 BC were fully capable of putting big blocks on top of other big blocks, right? If the Egyptians had suddenly developed cell phones or something like that, then I would say, okay, there's intervention there. But that's not what they did.
But while Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso might be questioned, his ideas deemed controversial, and his predictions dismissed as the stuff of science fiction, his impact on UFO legend and lore can never be minimized.
The military, the Pentagon, the government of the United States does not give that type of authority to a loose cannon. This man was highly regarded, highly respected.
At my age, what do I have to lose? I have to let my grandchildren and my children know this, because how long will I be around yet? And when I go, it goes with me.
There must have been many days that Philip Corso said to himself, why me? Why do I have this information? And again, I think that's one of the things that probably plagued him for so many years. It's pretty difficult to keep a secret like that within yourself.
Even today, only 10% of the story is told, my father says. The rest is classified.
Corso says he wasn't able to further develop the alien mind control interface. His theory was that it would only function with an alien brain. But this momentary setback, he claims, didn't forestall development of another Roswell artifact, an imprinted circuit of mysterious design.
We also had a little charred chip. Small thing, maybe 3/8 of an inch square, 2 threads coming out, and a little wind in the center with thin wires. These came from Roswell. We didn't know exactly the function of these integrated circuits.
Computer become reality. Corso claims the Roswell microchip was supposedly damaged from the crash, but that in his possession is another alien object, this one apparently fully functioning.
He knows from reports that when people were shining this thing around, it caused burning on the surfaces that it was aimed at.
Corso says he reads classified military reports speculating that the artifact from Roswell, apparently capable of burning holes in walls, is some kind of cutting tool, perhaps used for surgery.
It was glass tubes. And they emitted different color lights. And those were sent to Bell Laboratories. From that was one of the greatest advancements I think we have today, came out in fiber optics.
Many UFO researchers theorize that the spacecraft had no wiring because it was fitted instead with fiber optic cable. Transmitting information with light happens to be an old technology. It dates back to one of the pioneers of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell.
But we suspected that these were circuits, electrical circuits.
Corso asserts that he brings the object to Bell Labs, which had developed the transistor 14 years earlier. He says scientists there were able to analyze and later recreate the alien microchip.
What would happen if something like that were to occur? Well, what would happen is, in a very short time, the world would be transformed radically.
There's no doubt that after the development of the integrated circuit in the early 1960s, the world is transformed. Electronic devices from the cell phone to the laptop computer. At Hughes Aircraft from the late 1950s into the early 1960s, researchers have been working on what would become the first laser tracking and targeting devices for military aircraft. But engineers have run into a snag in their efforts to create a practical device. That is, Corso asserts, until he shows them the alien cutting tool.
It did accelerate after 1960-61 because people figured out new ways to make lasers. And as the science advanced, the engineering advanced.
Corso's filing cabinet reportedly contains another treasure from the Roswell trove.